Smart Bomb Interactive, and they're publishing and developing the National Geographic kids game Animal Jam, which is a great story for the U.S. market. So he's here to share. Welcome.
All right, thanks, Yen. So yeah, my name's Clark Stacey, and we are the publishers and developers of Animal Jam, which we do with a license from National Geographic. Quick facts about our company: we are based in Salt Lake City, Utah. We're about 100 people. Our revenue last year about 15 million, looking on track to double it this year. I mention that because a few years ago, when we were considering whether or not to get into the kids market and focus on that, I was wondering if it was possible to make a living doing it. And I had a hard time finding information about that, so I'm trying to give it to you. So I'm going to talk about what is actually a pretty substantial segment of the market for games in the US, but is not often talked about, and that is kids under 12 years old. Got a few interesting data points about that market, and some of the reasons I hear most often as to why most publishers avoid it. I'm going to talk about this through the lens of our game, Animal Jam, and so I'll tell you a little bit about that. This is a browser-based social playground for kids. Our broad target demographic is kids 6 to 10 years old. We do have kids that span that demographic and more, but our sweet spot is girls 7 to 9. And girls 7 to 9 is where the bulk of our monetization and our most engaged players come from. We just passed 20 million registered users. You'll probably hear a lot of registered user stats and recognize that for kind of a fluffy PR stat. However, in our definition, that is somebody who is actually registered, is actively playing the game. What probably matters more than that is we have about 3.5 million unique visitors a month and 1.6, a little more, million engaged active players every month. And those numbers have been climbing steadily for some time and are continuing to accelerate. Tracking services aren't a great barometer of success, but if you are a believer in Alexa, then in our category for our demographic, we are the #2 game in the world, or #2 game in the US, and about #4 in the world. Until now, the game has been just in English, and a little over 80% of our revenue comes from North America. However, this month we are launching localizations in Portuguese, French, and German, with Spanish closely following after that. And we're also very interested, obviously, in the Asian markets. So a bit about the kids market in the US. If you look for market data on this segment, you might think that they don't exist because most media studies can't gather information from kids under 12. In the US, there are privacy laws governing what sort of information you can solicit and store, and they're difficult to reach that way. There are over 60 million of them, though, and about half of whom are in the 6 to 11 broad age range that Animal Jam targets. Purchasing decisions for this age group are made by parents, and parents of young kids in the US tend to be more strict about the use of games than they are about other media, other entertainment sources. So your game in the US needs to appeal to kids, but it also needs to appeal to parents, especially moms. And what parents are looking for, what they're most interested in, is whether or not the game has any value beyond just entertainment, primarily. They're also, they look askance at advertising. About a third of them claim that they will not purchase games or make in-app purchases with games that have advertising. And of course, they want everything to be free because that's what they're used to paying. Right? So what are these 60 million kids doing online then, and how do you reach them? There's a lot of research in the US that suggests what they're not doing is going on social media sites like Facebook. None of the social media sites in the US, and I know in much of the rest of the world, allow kids under 12 to register accounts. And they try to get rid of them and call them out if they do. So this is a recent study by the Pew Research Center that suggests that at age 13, all children spontaneously, having no experience of them in the past, join up and get Facebook accounts or other social media accounts, which is kind of silly. Of course, kids are on these sites, interactive on these sites. This is an age range when children are just coming into themselves socially. They are experimenting with different personas and seeing how they relate to society. So unfortunately, one of the first things that they're learning is how to lie about their age to get on social media sites. As you may have heard, mobile adoption is up significantly with this age group. But we should be clear about what that means. While it is true that about 40% of kids under 10 in the US have their own cell phones, most of those are not smartphones and will not run a lot of your games. And while 75% of kids who are 8 and under have access to tablets or mobile devices in the house, only 8% of them actually own their own. They tend to be hand-me-downs. They tend to come down from older members of the family when they upgrade. Kids, by and large, those are the devices that they get. So while we do see these adoption numbers skyrocketing for mobile, a little hard to read, isn't it? On iOS in particular, you're going to need, if you want to appeal to this market, you're going to have to support a lot of legacy hardware, including the iPad 1 and 2, and probably all the way back to the iPod Touch 4. These are the devices that have trickled down into the hands of kids under 12. So to sum up about this market, it is big, it is significant in the US. It is underserved in social. Kids do want to be social, and there's not a lot of games that give them that opportunity because it's difficult for reasons we'll talk about. While mobile adoption is accelerating, there is still a lot of room left for browser-based games like ours to succeed there. And one last stat is that most screen time for kids in the US is still spent watching TV. There is a lot more two-screen entertainment going on, as they call it, that is kids who have a tablet in their laps while they're watching TV, but still, TV is by far the winner when it comes to their daily screen diet. So if there is so much opportunity in this market, why aren't more publishers focusing on it? That is because of the scary bits that are up here. These are the 4 horsemen of a kid-focused developer: safety, user acquisition, monetization, and design. You have to get all of these right to be successful, but the only one that you have to have right at the beginning, at launch, is safety. Safety in the Animal Jam world encompasses everything that can go wrong on a physical, real playground. That is bullying, inappropriate chat topics, kids bugging other kids, kids stealing from other kids, bad language, etc. While I'm not going to cover everything that we do to protect kids in Animal Jam, I will summarize the thing that tends to scare most publishers and developers the most, but doesn't necessarily need to. That is the US child protection law called COPA. There are now lawyers in the US who are building their entire practice out of interpreting COPA for companies like mine and potentially like yours. If your game is targeted to kids, if it's advertised to kids, you would be well advised to get to know one of these lawyers. Briefly, COPA deals with what information can be collected from kids under 12 years old, personally identifying information specifically, how you can store it, what you need parental permission for, what you can do with that data once you have it. I won't, it's a complicated series of regulations, and I won't go into too much detail, but I will give you kind of an overview of what we do to comply with it. And first and foremost is giving parents the ability to absolutely control the amount of interaction, if any, that their kids are going to have with other kids in our world. Of course, if you do community management already, you know that you need some advanced chat filtering. That is even more important and more sensitive with this market because these kids aren't actively trying to get around your filters to swear necessarily. They're trying to actively get around your filters in order to give each other their real names or addresses or phone numbers, all of which is fraught with peril both for them and for you. So we always have live moderators in the world. When it comes to chat filtering and the sort of real-time chat analysis that has to go on to prevent those sort of ingenious workarounds that kids have, I recommend you don't build your own. There are some excellent tools out there that are available for license, and I'll give you a link to some of those in just a moment. I would also suggest, if this is a space that you're interested in, to look into the various safe harbor programs that are available. Safe harbor there are a variety of ways to get this certification. but it will certify that at least at the time of publication, your game has been reviewed for its COPPA compliance, that you are compliant at that time. It is reassuring to parents, to children, and it may be of some help if you do ever run into a problem with the FCC, which is the Federal Communications Commission that enforces this. If you are not in compliance with COPPA and the FCC catches you, the penalties can be pretty severe. $16,000 per violation. If you have thousands or tens of thousands of users, that adds up to real money pretty quick. And also, of course, if your games rely on U.S. companies for distribution, monetization, advertising, anything like that, you can be shut out of that market by the same way. However, I think, in my non-lawyerly opinion, that hopefully won't get me into too much trouble, if really there are a couple things you need to remember about COPPA. The first one is that as long as safety is your top priority, that keeping kids safe in your game trumps everything else, you are probably going to make the decisions already that will lead you to COPPA compliance. The second is this link at the bottom of the page. I don't know if you can read it, it's kind of tough there, but anyway, these slides will be available afterwards. This contains basically everything you need to know about COPPA, links to a lot of the tools that I mentioned, the safe harbor certification, even some of the attorneys specializing in it. KRU is often mentioned in the same breath as COPPA. This is not a law, actually. It stands for the Children's Advertising Review Unit, and it is a voluntary set of guidelines that advertisers in the U.S. follow, best practices for advertising to kids. You do want to follow these guidelines because doing so is one of the ways that you can achieve that safe harbor certification. The same link that I had on the previous slide will give you links to how that is done. So what user acquisition channels work with this demographic? For us, in mobile, your usual channels will probably work, unless you're talking about the youngest part of the demographic, say kids under 7. For web-based games like Animal Jam, our best ROI has come from banner ads and search campaigns. However, I do recommend trying a lot of different things because that has yielded different results for us in different territories. For example, we'll go into a specific territory of interest, pick 1 or 2 medium-sized cities, and we'll go in there and blitz it. Do everything: radio, TV, bus benches, whatever we can find. Investing a small amount of money in each one of those, seeing what works, doubling down on that, and dumping the others. And we've learned a lot doing that, not just about what works in general, but what works for specific regions and specific components of this demographic. We found, for example, that TV doesn't work particularly well. Despite all of the screen time the kids are spending in front of it, it doesn't work really well for user acquisition for us in the U.S. Yeah, it does in other territories. I don't know if that's because some of our major competitors in the U.S. have their own TV stations and their kids are just used to tuning these ads out, but for us it hasn't been really successful in the U.S. Of course, we also benefit a great deal from our association with National Geographic, which has a lot of cachet with kids and with parents. Though we have to be careful how we invoke that association. We did a TV campaign not too long ago where a lot of emphasis was placed on the National Geographic brand, and we drove a lot of web traffic to National Geographic and none to us. So how do you make money with kids in games? With mobile games, it's frankly tough. If you've seen the stats such as are available, this demographic, kids under 12, does not monetize well. And in the US, a lot of that monetization is coming from paid apps, from premium apps. In-app purchase is a difficult topic with kids, and finding ways to ethically and responsibly monetize them but still stay in business is still a work in progress. Your players don't make their own purchasing decisions, which makes things tough. Parents will steer kids away from paid apps to free apps. For Animal Jam, we sell subscriptions, both online and through retail gift cards. We do no advertising in Animal Jam. That's something that is sort of a covenant with parents that we think has borne more fruit for us than it's lost us. All of our educational content is free. Actually, most of the gameplay content is free too. For web and PC games for kids, subscriptions work in the US. And the reason that they work is because parents like them. The reason parents like them is because they only get bugged once. There's sort of a tacit agreement with parents that if they subscribe to the game, their child's not going to come back 10 minutes later because they've run out of Smurf berries or whatever. You've made the decision, the purchase decision, and they're done. So I'll show you why they like the subscription model versus the free-to-play. And you've seen some similar stats today. Sergio this morning had something even more dramatic than this. But on top is a breakdown of where most in-app purchase-driven free-to-play mobile games get most of their revenue. That is less than 10% of players, those that are called the whales, comprise far more than 50% of the revenue. Below that is a breakdown of where Animal Jam revenue comes from, and it's inverted. We don't have a lot of players that pay more than the monthly baseline average, and those that do don't represent a significant portion of our revenue. Parents know that the goal of IAP-driven games is to get kids caught in that kind of Skinner box where they're going to spend some money, and they don't like it. In fact, they're also, there's talk of more regulation around that, though that hasn't materialized yet. You might not recognize what we would consider a big spender in Animal Jam. Our most expensive subscription option on a monthly basis is $5.95, so we would call anybody who spends more than $6 a month to be a big spender. The ones that are spending more than that are going in and purchasing additional virtual currency. But even those are not a significant difference. The delta between them and the players that are just spending the base subscription amount a month is only about $7.50, so about the amount of 1 month worth of subscription. So in terms of overall revenue, the impact of people spending more than $6 a month is, as I said, less than 10% of our revenue. Lifetime revenue for a subscriber in Animal Jam is around $55. But the lifetime revenue of those that are spending more is not significantly more. So this is something that actually affects every aspect of design and live ops for us. The fact that this is the way our revenue is balanced, and this is an example to show you why. Let's say that we could, double, quadruple the amount that our big spenders were spending in Animal Jam. Let's say we create a land in Animal Jam that costs $50 to get into, and that the same proportion of players then are going to go in and do that. So our lifetime revenue for those players goes up dramatically. $103 is something that I think a lot of mobile developers wouldn't mind seeing. And that would then increase our overall revenue by 8.4% based on how many of those players we have. It would also piss off parents, and it would also disappoint a lot of kids. And overall for us, that's kind of a lose. If, however, we put the same amount of effort into increasing retention and engagement with all players, that is, we apply the same amount of effort into just making kids happy sticking around playing the game, then the lifetime revenue of those players only goes up about $6, but it goes up for everybody. So if we got the subscription to only last 1 more month, and that just went up $6, then the impact is actually more dramatic on monetary terms, over 11%, but we also have happy parents, more engaged kids, and everybody gets presents. So here's the last of the scary bits that I mentioned that are keeping developers and publishers away from the kids market in the US. And I'm going to focus on what I think is the single biggest mistake that developers for kids make, and I know how pervasive this is because we still make it all the time. That is the need to know your demographic and identify your demographic precisely. Kids on their own are not a demographic. It's more like 6 demographics. Even kids 6 to 10 is very broad. You can't really lump kids together unless they're 5 or 6 or under. by the time they reach 6, 7 years old, they're very distinct statistical development differences among the different ages and between the different genders. A kid, boy 6 to 7, is in general not going to be attracted to the same role-playing situations, the same game mechanics, the same social dynamics as a girl 7 to 9. Now, it is possible without gender stereotyping to create games that engage across gender, and it's something that we think is important, but at the same time you have to be aware of what the different developmental stages are for kids in this age group and what they're naturally attracted to. You need to know really what sort of gameplay attracts them. This brings the second point, which is I would recommend looking around your studio if this is a market you're interested in and seeing if there are any kids there. If there aren't, focus groups can answer certain questions, but what if you don't have any questions? What if you're just looking for inspiration? Or you can't have a regimented focus group every time you have a UI question, or you have you're wondering, about difficulty level or something. You need kids looking at your game all the time, as frequently as possible. Now, the most expedient route to that would be to acquire some children somehow. How you do that, I leave to you. But you don't necessarily need to look to inspiration this way. What you need to do is go to a playground. Go to a playground and look at the games that kids are inventing spontaneously themselves, the sort of role-playing that they're doing, how they communicate the rules of those games to themselves. And probably the best way to study play mechanics at different levels of development, different stages of development, is to just give them some creative tools. Give them some crayons and Legos, and look at what they build, because what they build is what they want to play with. And that's really kind of the point, is that kids like to play with toys. And, kids like to play with toys. And in general, games that are going to appeal to kids need to work like toys work. That is, they have to broadly engage them creatively. They have to fit into a lot of different play scenarios for them. A doll can play 1,000 different roles in the mind of a child, but software tends to usually only do one thing, and it tends to only be played with in one way. Creating things that feel more toy-like are, I think, how a lot of games can succeed and should succeed for kids this age. So that pretty much sums up the scary bits that I'd mentioned at the outset. I do have one more thing to show you, though. In the last year or so, we've been putting a lot of thought into how to bring the Animal Jam experience into mobile. This is a web-based game now. We do have a companion app that we put out to test the waters there, but bringing the full experience to mobile, which means all of the educational content, all of the social content, the ability to create avatars, create social spaces, play different games spontaneously, interact in real time. This is Animal Jam in 3D running on an iPad. And when we first created Animal Jam, we built all of our assets, all of our characters, and animated them in 3D because we were console developers, and that's kind of where we came from. But it's also enabled us to take everything that we've built so far and seamlessly bringing it into a 3D world. So the ultimate vision here is that Animal Jam will be accessible from any screen, iOS, Android, and PC, and that it will be the same unified game world that they're playing in. So our goal overall, and the reason that we're doing this, is we think that we can create a social network for kids that is safe and engaging and educational, frankly. And that's hopefully there's some tidbits in how we've succeeded in that in the US that you can take away and apply to appealing to that market yourselves. Thanks.